So now we're going to extend our use of Pirate, and we are going to look at what is called a one-argument function. Now, I know that you have heard of functions in your math class, right? And those are just mathematical relationships between two variables. So when we talk about a function, x plus 7, for example, is a function. So we have x, which is a variable, and then what we're going to do to that x. So according to this function, we are going to take that x and we are going to add 7. Now, sometimes you see this really fancy thing out front, this f of x. The f stands for function, and then the x is for the variable, right? So this function of x. So what this means is the function of x means we will take the x and add 7. So the function is simply the calculation that we're going to perform, right? So we need to put in something for x. So let's just say that we're going to say x equals 1. So our input is 1. So we are going to put 1 into that function. And then there's going to be a calculation, right? So now we're going to take that 1 and we're going to add 7 to it. So then what do you get? Well, 1 plus 7 is 8. So this is what gets put out from the program. So we call this the output. So what if x is equal to 115? Well, the calculation that's going to be performed is 115 plus 7. So our output is going to be 122. So we're going to use this idea and we are going to create some functions in Pirate. Basically, we're going to use Pirate as a fancy calculator. And we're going to start with something really simple so that when we do some things that are not so simple, we don't get confused by the coding part of it later on. So we're going to start with something that we already know how to do. And most of us at some point in time or another have found the perimeter of a square. So on worksheet 4, right, you are going to draw the square about 2 centimeters on a side. Don't get caught up if it's not exactly 2 centimeters. You don't really need a ruler. But just sketch out a 2 centimeter long square. And then determine the perimeter. And the really important thing here is to show your work. Because the work is actually the function. Now, a lot of us can do this in our head, and that's fine. But I want to be able to think about what is actually happening behind the scenes for you to get your answer. And then draw a square with a side length of 3. And then to determine the perimeter and show your work. And then on number 5, think about a square with a side L, right? We don't know what L is. It can be anything. How would we find the perimeter for that square? So pause for a minute and go through and do that on your worksheet. And then we're going to turn our paper over. And on the back is what's called a design recipe. Now, basically, this is just an outline for our Pirate program. So this is going to make us stop and think about what are the things that we need to be inputting and what are the things that we want to output. So the first thing that we need to do to be able to write a function is identify what we want our output to be. What are we trying to find? What do we want the computer to do for us? So the purpose of this particular function is to find the perimeter of a square, right? So that's our output. That's what we want our computer to tell us when we put an input in. Now, what do you need to know to find the perimeter of a square? What is our input going to have to be? Well, to find the perimeter of a square, you need to know the length of the sides. So our input is going to be the length, and our output is going to be the perimeter. Now on the front, it told you that we were going to measure these in centimeters. And so the output will also be in centimeters. When you add centimeters all together, right, you get centimeters at the end. Okay, so that's just looking at what do we want to put in to get what we want out. So then this next section is what's called a contract and purpose statement. Now when you think about what a contract is an agreement, right? I'm going to give you something, but you have to give me something in return. So the contract is just going to be an agreement with the computer, the agreement with Pirate. What is going to happen with this particular function? Okay, this first part is the name of our function. This has already been filled in for you as Squipper. Why do you think it is named this way? Well, our function is trying to find the perimeter of a square. So the squa represents the square, and the per represents the perimeter. It doesn't really matter what this is. It is an identifier, just like you used the other day. When you made a pirate create a red circle, you named that function red circle, right? So you want to name it something that is descriptive and easy to type, but we should be able to look at it and kind of have a good idea of what is happening with that function. Now notice that there is a space followed by 2 colons and another space. Remember, spaces are important here. The domain is a fancy math term, and it is going to be defined as the input. And it's going to be defined as a type of data. Now we've talked about 3 different types of data. We've talked about numbers and strings and images. So if we are inputting length, what kind of data is this? This is a number with a capital N. So what kind of input are we going to use? We're going to input a number. So this part of the contract is going to tell Pirate that we should expect a number as the input. And then we have our little arrow, which is a dash and a little caret, both with spaces. And we have a number in the range. Again, range is a fancy math term for output. Perimeter is also a number. So this square function consumes the length, which is a number, and produces the perimeter, which is also a number. So that's what we're actually going to put here on our purpose statement. This whole contract can be said as a sentence. So the Squipper function consumes length and produces perimeter. Now, what does this little hashtag out in the front mean? It's a comment, and it's for the humans. And you definitely want to put this down because I can guarantee you that when you come back here in a couple days, you're not going to know what that contract means. So this whole thing here is kind of like the introduction to our paper, right? It's getting us set up. Here are the things that we're going to input. Here's the type of data that we're going to input as well. The example section is where we test our function to see if it does what we want it to. So this first line is partially filled in for us. So we have the function name, which is Squipper. And then in parentheses, we have a number. And that is an example input. So this first line is saying that the square perimeter function is going to input the number 2. So if we input the number 2, that is representing the length of our square. So what is the perimeter of a square with a length of 2? Now, one thing that you will notice is when you type this in, is a word that Pirate knows. Okay, it's a checking word. So it is going to compare the beginning of this statement to the end of this statement to see if they are the same thing. So the square perimeter of the side length 2 is 8. And why is it 8? So think about why this is true. It's because 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 8. Square has 4 sides. Each side has a length of 2. We're going to add them all together. So in this line, we are going to write 8 because 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Now remember, there are spaces in between those pluses. So now take a minute and fill in your own example. So now we're actually to the point where we want to put the actual function into our program. So this section here, we have the Squipper function, and then in parentheses, we're going to have our input, but we're going to put this in as a variable. Now, the variable that we're putting in is the length of the side of our square, so we can abbreviate that as L. But I want to point out that lowercase l is probably the absolute worst letter that you can use anywhere because it looks like a capital I, and it can also look like a 1. So I would highly suggest using a capital L as opposed to a lowercase l, just to avoid any confusion. So anytime you use the letter L, use it capital. So the Squipper function is going to take in a variable L. And then it is going to perform the calculation of L plus L plus L plus L. So now go into the Pirate editor and start with the contract and purpose statement. Basically, you're going to put this whole sheet into Pirate exactly as it is. Okay, anything that you filled in, you want to put that into Pirate. So take a couple minutes and put that in, and then we'll check to see what you have. Program for your square perimeter function. First thing, very first line tells you what this program is about. Never forget that. And then you have your contract, and then you have your examples, and then you have your function. Now to find out if this is correct, come over here to your interactions window and click on run. If it's correct, you will have a block that says all your tests have passed. So now you can find the perimeter of any square. You type in Squipper and say 9, you are inputting the 9, you're inputting the length of the square. So when you hit enter, not run, enter, you should get 36 as the perimeter. And you can do this for any square. Okay, so it's a big square. We hit enter, it's going to give you their perimeter. So congratulations, you've just made your first program in Pirate.